doesn't seem concerned that he can't hear us.
Hey, welcome. I can hear you now.
Okay.
We are live. All right. Thank you guys for coming. I wanted to first thank you for taking the time out today to launch DDD US. It's a pretty big thing, I think, for the community. We're going to try to create community small groups all over the country. Right now, we only have about 4, but we'd like to get more. And we'd like to spread the understanding of what DDD really is, and clear up some confusion. There are a lot of us who are sort of in competition with each other in the U.S. that really support one another. It's a different type of community in the DDD world. So the first thing I wanted to do is just talk about Europe, because Europe is big. They get about 1,500 to 2,000 participants in their conference every year. And Nick, I was going to ask you, what is your take on the difference between how Europe has taken off and the United States is kind of where it's at, lagging behind?
So an interesting question. I guess it's just one of those things, right, where something gets traction in one place and a community forms. I think it's more about the circumstances rather than any underlying issues. A DDD community formed in Europe and it just grew. People liked this way of building software. And yeah, just momentum from there, really. Then we started getting more meetups and a big European DDD conference every year, which is definitely like the center of the DDD universe right now. And people see that. And because of that, it's a way to connect. And it's, if you're interested in DDD in Europe, you can find other people interested in something very easily, in the same things very easily. So equally, if you want to learn it, I guess, you're going to learn a skill that other people are using. You can use it in your work. You're not going to be that one person. Just knowing that there's a community of people out there.
Yeah.
Why it hasn't taken off in the US, I'm not sure. I guess just...
Okay. Well, let's introduce everybody and talk about all these things. Nick Toon is joining us from London, I believe, today. And he's written the Patterns Practices book on DDD, as well as a book coming out, the Architecture Modernization book, coming out in October, I believe. And
yeah, all set for October.
Okay. And you've been in the DDD community for quite a number of years, helping that European movement, but you've also traveled around the world doing this, right?
I've done DDD outside my home country. I wouldn't say I've been to every country on the globe and put a DDD flag there.
But you've been to Turkey and number of other places and helped out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also we have Diane Monteleon, and she has been in the DDD community. You've seen her around Amsterdam at the conferences, and I'd like to let her give kind of her history in this space.
So I was introduced to the organizer by Ruth Mallon, who is an architect that we all know and at some point have intersected with. And I was new to DDD, but not to the systems thinking, collective modeling, the foundational skill set that lets us do something like things like domain-driven design. And so then I just really fell in love with the community, and I have been back every year since, and expanded so that now I teach workshops in other countries at other conferences. I'm writing a book myself, and so I found it an incredibly nourishing space for nonlinear approaches to software development, which are increasingly necessary. in our modern world.
All right, thank you. We also have Vlad Khononov. He's written Learning Domain-Driven Design, and that's an O'Reilly offering, and a couple other. He's got another book out of cohesion, and one he's working on, I believe. Let us know what you're doing. Yeah, coupling.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been practicing domain-driven design for quite some time now. I was learning from Nick's book, Patterns, Practices, and Principles of Domain-Driven Design. Yeah, I read on mine, learning domain-driven design right now, working on balancing coupling in software design. And for me, you can say that I am a domain-driven design fanboy. Yeah, regarding the why it's really popular in Europe, I would say that the community. I wanted to mention another conference which is not that popular right now because the company doesn't exist anymore, Skills Matter, but we had that domain-driven design exchange. I think it was way before domain-driven design Europe. And I think at that early point, the community was already building up around it. And we have all the meetups all around Europe. And I am based in Israel, and I think that we are closer to United States here than to Europe in that regard of domain-driven design adoption.
All right. And last but not least is Michael Feathers joining us today. He wrote the book, Working Effectively with Legacy Code. And Michael, kind of what's your connection with DDD? I know you did a keynote over in Denver in 2018 at Explore DDD. What are your thoughts around your connection to that?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question because I've been around for ages. I've got all my gray hair and stuff like that, right? And the book I wrote, Working Effectively with Legacy Code, came out in 2004. I just remember being impressed when Eric Evans' original book about DDD came out because it codified a lot of very interesting knowledge that we had in the industry, and he introduced some new things. And it's been interesting to go and basically see that the nomenclature is extended and it's basically just pervasive across the industry now. When I went to that conference that I keynoted, DDD Expo, wait a second, I'm sorry, Explore DDD, okay. Yeah,
Explore
great
DDD.
conference.
Yep.
The thing is, it was very interesting to me to notice that this is a group of people that basically really will have discussions about design, right? And I was very impressed by that because I got kind of caught up in the Agile movement when it first started. And we would always do design, but we didn't really talk about design that much relative to the kind of process things you would do, like TDD and refactoring and stuff like that. It was very much for us the thing in motion rather than talking about the thing that you arrive at. And it feels kind of sad in a way that basically the word design has been kind of like pulled into almost like the UX space in a way. And we don't really talk about software design proper in a way. And I just, I am forging better connections with a lot of people who've been in DDD since the beginning. And I just find that it seems like that's a very valuable thing for us to do, is to go and really push the ideas of design and sort of get people to go and think about it a bit more than they might if they're just basically adopting a process point of view.
That's right down the line that I think where a lot of the colleagues I talk to are thinking. We're trying to put design in an iterative approach within Agile instead of eliminating it and thinking that it's like a waterfall idea. And so, Nick, I was going to come back to you and ask you that question. What is the difference between a DDD design project and one that doesn't have that element to it?
Well, I think firstly, you could get all the benefits of domain-driven design and just not realize it. You could do domain-driven design almost to the letter, maybe not using the terminology, but you could get all the benefits and follow all the same principles. I think, as Michael said, it really codified a lot of good ideas around design. So if you're doing domain-driven design intentionally or unintentionally, I think you're just making all of your decisions about how you structure your code, how you name your code, and the activities you use to get there by spending time with domain experts, for example. So I think that's key. If you're working in a team and you enjoy working with people who are experts in the domain you're building the software for, and your software has some connection to their mental model, being very careful not to say, it matches perfectly or it's a model of the real world. But if your software is being designed based on how your domain experts see the world, and you can talk about your software in a way that your domain experts can have sensible conversations with you about, I think you're doing domain-driven design. And ultimately, the reason for that is just keeping the software easier to evolve. When we talk about software design, there's a lot of design patterns that are domain agnostic, things like MVC, those kind of patterns. But with domain-driven design, it's taking it one level above. It's saying we're going to make some choices based on the specific domain we're working in, the specific product requirements we've got, and you wouldn't get to the same design if you only followed those generic technical design patterns, which are useful. I'm saying, like, DDD is a layer on top of that.
Okay. In your workshops, do you find that people gravitate towards the connection between the domain and technology, or is there a barrier?
Yeah, so a couple of examples that come to my mind immediately are, so let's say, example of a company that's got a monolithic system, wants to move to something more modular. Could be microservices, or it could be a monolith. Let's keep that debate to one side for now. And I find people always use technical terms like the name of a system. It might be something like something out of Star Wars. It's not really a domain terminology. Or people say, yeah, this bit of data comes from that system and goes into this database, and then that database is accessed by these different systems, and all of the terminology is very technical. And I would say, yeah, that's the thinking gap. If we take it all the way to the extreme, I guess what I'm saying is you should be able to talk about your architecture using almost only domain terminology. And that's kind of one of the things I do in my workshop. We use a technique called domain message flow modeling, for example, where you design an architecture using only domain terminology, names of your services, commands, events, and queries in domain terminology. So yeah, I do think that's one of the key observations. People naturally don't use domain terminology when they could do it a bit more. It doesn't come naturally, or maybe we're not taught to do things that way, but it's definitely an observation.
Interesting. Diana, when you, in your introduction, you were talking about nonlinear thinking and systems design. Can you explain a little bit more about how important that is in regards to the domain?
Yeah, I mean, I want to build on what Nick is saying, that I have no data to back this up, but I would guess that one blocker to the adoption of domain-driven design in the US is organizations in the US like to buy products that solve their problem. Like, here's the solution and we can apply it safe, and we can make then, things happen the way we want to have them. And that isn't, that would miss the point. That it's been shocking to me how often I've been out there in the world architecting information systems and then discover that there's something in domain-driven design or something in a workshop that we're holding together that describes exactly what I had been doing. And so for me, the cultivation of skill set, right? So the O'Reilly book, O'Reilly named it Learning Systems Thinking, and originally I named it Mind Shift, which is not as good a title. So I'm glad it was not up to me. But the point being that we are, to what Nick is saying about shifting our language, shifting the frame through which we look at these emergent systems is so fundamental to designing them that we can't just lay on a linear process onto a non-linear system where there's all kinds of relationships or we're forming relationships. And so for me, my focus is on domain-driven design, but more to helping people do the types of design activities that really do help them make a difference in their software system. And I'm also with Nick in that I'm somewhat agnostic about what to call it, right? Like I don't really mind if we call it by the right definition. I just mind whether or not we're doing it well together.
Okay, so let's talk about doing it well together. What, Michael, have you seen in the wild work, regardless of terminology, when it comes to wrangling behavior versus just making data models and piling behavior on top of it?
Wrangling behavior? Let's see. I guess the terminology around that. Yeah, basically I spend a lot of time helping people refactor in large systems. And when it comes to wrangling behavior, I guess the thing I kind of look at is how we can frame things quite often, right? So I'm always looking for the difference between how people talk about the system and what's there, and basically saying, okay, well, if you're using this terminology, we should be able to see it in the code. If we don't see it in the code, that's indicative of a problem, right? And I tend to look at rename class as being like one of the most powerful refactorings. If you can rename an abstraction, that basically makes it fall more in line with a system of names, then things are much better in that regard. So yeah, a lot of refactoring work, and it really comes down to kind of solidifying a domain that's probably nascent within the code. And I think for me, that really comes down to understanding the behavior and then trying to go and understand a bit more about different ways that we might go and actually look at that behavior and then sort of like help ourselves gravitate towards that sort of thing. But for the most part, this isn't really like, when I'm working with teams, it isn't about like forming a new direction in terms of like, this is like a new thing that we're working on. It's really about going and taking things that exist already and basically presenting a narrative that helps people move forward with things. So yeah, it's kind of a fun thing.
I've noticed that there's a couple of ways of going about getting the software that the domain wants. There's a heavy focus on refactoring systems that exist, and then there's a heavy focus on just finding out what the domain wants and making that, learning from domain experts who may not have been heard for a long time. Vlad, I was going to go to you for a minute and talk about what is your take on how do you get people to think about the right way to approach it, going systems or domain first or a blend of the two?
Oh, it really depends on the people because sometimes you really want to avoid mentioning domain-driven design. You can still use some Jedi mind tricks to implement aggregates, use bounded contexts, format ubiquitous language without mentioning them, just basing your architecture on logic, because people deep inside, they're reasonable. They want to make a good work. So, however, if you say bounded context or an aggregate, in some companies, it can scare people off. Or on the other hand, it can induce an argument about what is a bounded context and why do we need microservices here? But we already have microservices. Look how many Lambda functions we have here. So sometimes, it's worth using some Jedi mind tricks to get yourself around those mental blocks, because some people are afraid of domain-driven design. And by the way, I wanted to reiterate on what Nick said earlier, that some people are doing domain-driven design without mentioning it. And Diana, if you remember, when we met for the first time, it was O'Reilly Software Architecture Conference. You did a talk, and afterwards I came and asked you, you were talking about domain-driven design, but you didn't mention it even once. Why?
Because I didn't know. Right? And then that's how I ended up at MooCon And that's where I then met more people in the community. You made that. You were like, ooh, I found this person who thinks this way already. I'm going to introduce her to more people. And that's pretty much how the whole community has happened, right? We sort of find each other.
Yeah. So, John, to answer your question, to get people interested in using domain-driven design, for me, the best way to sell it, let's call it selling, is to go from values. Like, you want to do good work. So, for example, you don't want to corrupt your data, right? Okay. So from that, we can talk about transactional boundaries. What should be in, what can we leave outside of it, etc., etc. So yeah, for me, values and how that going to make a person's job more efficient, better, how they can use it to produce better code is the way to sell domain-driven design.
All right. So with that, we're going to launch the website that talks about domain-driven design. And, you know, if those who are already thinking about systems design may not have the terminology, they might gravitate towards this and begin to learn some of the technology or the technical terms around DDD and get some validation around that. So we're hoping that it brings some value. I'm going to switch over to the go live session. So we're going to try to go live here. I have no idea how this is going to work.
Live coding. Woo!
Mhm.
Live design.
You guys are going to,
Live design.
you'll get to under the covers, see it go live here. Nothing to hide. Actually have a staging site, the big stage. Here we go. My request is being processed. So when the executives come and ask you, where are we with this request, you can say, your request is being processed.
Yeah, compiling.
Compiling. I was just going to say, I love the XKCD. I used to have it hanging up in my office, the XKCD with the everybody's playing swords on the chairs, like the chairs of the horses, and they're playing swords. And it's like, what are you doing? Compiling.
Okay, we're live. And we're just going to take a couple minutes to look at the site, talk about what we're trying to accomplish with it, and go from there. So the first thing I'll point out is Nick really gave me a kind of an idea of this feature factory and escaping that model where we're just trying to cram features into software, and we're moving into an intentional design model. And so we're going to basically highlight that idea throughout this site. So there's a little statement about that here, and then a quick advertisement. It's not an advertisement. We're not getting paid to say go to explore DDD, but go to explore DDD in Denver. And then we talk about replacing feature factories with design, specifically DDD. And we have two focuses. We want to upgrade enterprises to think about design for all their complex projects. And we also want to have a way for people to have a personal growth in their design capability. So we're going to work on those two angles in different ways. And one of them is to talk about why DDD might be important to you. I know it's really small on your screen, but if you go to dddunitedstates.com, you can follow along. And different roles care about different things when it comes to DDD. So we took a stab at a little bit of content in this accordion here to talk about what might matter to you and what benefits you get from design, essentially, specifically from DDD. And then we list a few additional benefits of durability and cost reduction and maintenance and so forth. And at the bottom of this page, you can click here, or you click the journey link at the menu and get a 10-step process for beginning to learn domain-driven design. Vlad, your book is highlighted here in step 3 to read a couple of chapters, as well as I think it's step 8 to read a couple more chapters. And there are a couple of videos here that are amazing. You can watch those on your own time. They're only 5 minutes, but they explain bounded contexts and aggregates really quickly and really easily. And everyone I've shown them to, they're pretty impressed, and they grabbed the concepts pretty easily. So I added those. Once you finish that journey, the 10th step is to pick a workshop, go to one of Nick's, one of Vlad's, one of Diana's, but start practicing. Practice design. In the learning tab, we just have the books and videos and some articles that speak to kind of the power of DDD from various different luminaries' perspective. And that's really mainly it. We have a couple of conferences. One is in Denver and one is in Europe. We also have Taiwan with their Inspire conference. And for local meetups, this is the last page. Then we'll talk about next steps. We have 4 meetups. I run the one in Portland, and there are 3 others. Endu runs Southern California. And I just wanted to highlight that we're going to try to get at least one in every major metropolitan area over the next couple of years. So this is probably going to have a map up top at one point with a bunch of pinpoints that show where all the meetups are that are talking about design. The main thing we want to do is give people the confidence that we don't have to build big balls of mud anymore. That needs to become a thing of the past. We need to be intentional about what it is we're trying to accomplish in the software from a domain perspective, or what is the business trying to accomplish. And most places I go, they don't feel empowered. They're under time crunch. They're doing business as usual. And Nick, I was going to go back to you and ask, what do you think are some of the things we can do today to start moving forward in a healthier direction with our software development?
Well, I think community is always a big one, right? All throughout my career, what's encouraged me to create better software is the people I've been working with, or people in the community talking about new ideas. So, following people in some way, attending meetups. One of the points I was going to jump in and make is some of those meetup groups already, they're doing virtual events. So if you're not in those areas, I know Indu in California, she's doing some virtual events. So that's one way. So yeah, your question was how
How we could help encourage enterprises to allow for the design process? What are the things that we can promote?
Yeah, I guess with any kind of change initiative or change approach like that, there's always a mixture of bottom up and top down, right? Obviously, you can try things in your immediate team, and then share what your team's doing, see if other teams get excited. I was having a conversation a couple of days ago after the DDD London meetup, and they were telling me, so they moved to this structure where teams are organized around domains, and then within each team, they're allowed to use whatever process they want to, so Scrum, Kanban, and I think the VP of engineering, he said to me, one of the teams is doing Shape Up, and then they liked it, and another team saw them and thought, yeah, we kind of like that, and another team adopted it. So I think when something works, it's infectious. Another company I've worked at, they tried mob programming. One team started doing it. Another team saw it and liked it. So, you know, bottom up, grassroots, do something, let others be aware of how you're working, see the benefits of it. It can spread that way. And then, yeah, I think from the top down approach is try and get your message out to a wider audience, someone who's quite influential in the company. So when I worked at Salesforce, for example, the global CTO, he said something along the lines of, I've read Sam Newman's book on microservices, and it's something I'd like us all to do. He explained the reasons behind that. He talked about bounded context, actually, which is in Sam's book. And so that was coming at it from the other angle, from a top-down perspective, like, hey, this looks good. Let's try and do more of this. Any people who try this, you've got my backing and support. And you know, there's some implicit or explicit, like, we're going to help you to do this. And then I guess another perspective is really trying to break out of the development silo, because really DDD is a more collaborative approach that crosses silo boundaries. And that can be a bit more difficult sometimes. If you're used to working in a very isolated, product defines the requirements, developers build the software, you might have some people who translate between domain experts and developers. Chipping away at that can take a bit longer. A good example recently was a Canadian company. A new CTO came in. He likes XP. He likes design. He likes domain-driven design. He wanted to try and get the ideas instilled in the company. It's not something they'd done before. You know, developers and product was quite a handover there. And we basically had a workshop where we had 60 people. That was a bit more than we originally planned for. But, you know, it's always good to have some keen faces. We got really lucky in terms, we got like a whole office floor that hadn't been furbished yet. So a massive space with lots of walls, big windows, and lots of light coming in. You know, the perfect space. And developers, sales, marketing, support, they were all there. And they were all mapping out the as-is processes. They identified some subdomains, just talking about all the challenges. I think there was one process, and one of the salespeople was talking about, 180 steps. How can you have a process with 180 steps? And everyone was like, wow, I had no idea this was going on in the company. And then on day 2, we moved more towards process modeling, event storming. So if we could design the domain here, we're not talking about the software, we're talking about if we could design how the business works, including the software, how would that look? And we had groups of 5 or 6 people taking what they'd done on day 1, the current state, designing a future state. So again, you had developers, QA people, domain experts like sales and marketing, you had infrastructure people there, and they were all, how can we optimize how the business works? So that's quite a long-winded way of saying just do it, basically. If you bring those people together and you try doing some modeling together, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in a lot of companies. And as Vlad said earlier, it depends a lot on the people. In that group, people were like, you know, we learned stuff here. This isn't how we've worked before. It's been a very powerful, enjoyable experience. But in some companies, there are people who kind of like having the silos and controlling things. You know, we've seen the McKinsey survey recently about developer productivity. So I'm not going to say that works everywhere, but I think just trying collaborative modeling with a cross-functional group on something interesting. And I would say one final thing is, if you're going to do this, it often helps if there's going to be something after the workshop. You don't want to have a great workshop and then it's like, well, that was nice. We talked about all this stuff that's broken and how we might fix it, but we're not going to fix it. We're going to just get back in the monolith and start fixing some bugs or, you know, feature factory mode again. I think workshop is great if you can connect that to something you're about to work on. So what you do in the workshop leads to an impact. I think that's really a perfect conditions there. And I think if you do that, if you try that, oops, it's going to put my camera back on. Sorry about that. That's very awkward timing. I've been having an issue today. I was just about to finish as well.
That's all right.
I was just about to say, if you do all of that, that's probably, you've done everything possible to make it work, really. It's not guaranteed to work, but I think that is, you know, if those are the perfect conditions, basically.
And then sometimes your camera goes out. So thanks, Nick. Diana, I was going to ask you a quick question. The challenge of control versus autonomy, right? How do you approach that in the work you do?
Yeah, so this is what I was thinking too while I was listening to Nick, is that generally speaking, I haven't found it too much of a challenge to engage enterprise with this potential. You know, they hear me speak, or they read a book, someone reads a book, or they have a conversation. Yes, we want all the benefits of architecting, designing in these kinds of ways. And then a little bit down the road, there's, well, no, wait, no. We're just going to top down, like we're going to draw us the target architecture so we know what to tell everyone to build. That would actually not be the process. That would not be how we're going to do this today. And so the structure of information sharing, the hierarchical structure, we start learning that in kindergarten. Meeting external expectations, what learning means. Learning means passing an AWS certification exam. And so when we do this type of design together, we are also really engaging some of our fundamental mental models about how to work together. And I have experienced organizations where people were very attached to their silos, and like the Matrix, that they'll fight to keep it until they're ready to change, they'll fight to keep it. And so the teams that I have worked on that were truly self-organizing, where we were able to integrate design, where we were doing hard things, building complex things, usually cross-functionally with multiple different teams involved, the ones that have been really successful, it's that blend of I have your back, and also I'm developing personal mastery in this process. I'm learning and growing and developing expertise by consuming other people's expertise. And so I think we have a kind of an all or nothing, like either we want a lot of control or we want a lot of autonomy. And I've worked in situations where there was a lot of autonomy and it was also not workable, where it was just 8 people in a room with completely different viewpoints and no ability to reconcile them, like no ability to think together and model together. And so that nuance, that balance, this is why Donella Meadows says that we dance with systems, right? We don't control them, we dance with them. But this is also what we're doing with each other. We're creating the ability to have autonomy, to build things in the way that we know makes sense, but without telling the rest of the world to go to hell, Like we're always in relationships. Systems are always in relationship. People are always in relationships, and defining these relationships is the work. That's pretty much what we do.
Yeah, that's the separate ways relationship. Everybody goes their separate way. Michael, we talked a little bit about anti-corruption layer the other day, and I wanted you to kind of expound upon how you might leverage that idea in a legacy system, since you do a lot of that work.
Well, it really comes down to how bad the code is. It's an interesting thing with this too, because essentially you can do this thing with anti-corruption layers to try to cordon off a particular area of the system and either start to rewrite it or work around it, that kind of thing. Or basically try to take a core domain and basically sort of keep this pristine in some sense. So sometimes I'll visit teams and they've done that already, and that's pretty good. I'm always looking to go and sort of understand what's valuable across the entire system. I think that's just because of my legacy focus with things. And it's an interesting thing about this. I started thinking a bit about this as Nick and Diana were talking, that it seems that one of the things that we miss sometimes when we're planning the future, trying to decide what the architecture is and what it should be, that conversation with the domain experts is extremely important. But it seems like the other side of it is important as well. And it's really this thing of understanding what we really have, right? Because the thing is, we generally have a system that's working already, unless we're starting completely from scratch. And this thing of going and investigating where the responsibilities lie across the entire system is very valuable, because it allows us to go and think about what we might want to go and repurpose and what we might want to go and sort of get rid of and replace and all these other things. Code is really codified knowledge in a system. And it's one of those things that we can kind of pretend isn't there, or we can basically go and take it and leverage it forward with our things. So one thing I've done with some teams is this thing of going and trying to identify the core domain, working with domain experts and the developers to kind of arrive at that. And just basically treating that as almost like a blank page process, but then go back and look at the code and sort of understand where things happen to be. And that's very useful, because it allows you to go and start to go and make targeted moves, or think at least about, independently of any kind of like re-architecting that you're doing, think about what should be the rules of engagement for different areas of the system. If you're changing this thing, how do you actually basically work in alignment with the direction that you're going in? And I think that's the thing that I kind of like focus on an awful lot, which is really trying to go and understand the value that exists in the system and how we're best able to leverage it in the plans that we have going forward. So anti-corruption layer basically plays its part in some areas of the system that might be particularly bad or particularly good. And you want to go and kind of coordinate those things out. But I think this identification process is one of those things I try to focus on that comes before that.
And identifying different purposes. Some are very value stream aligned, some are more broad, abstract needs. Vlad, what are your thoughts on team topologies and its impact on the community, given the types of differences of need?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, team topologies, event storming, these things are not really part of domain-driven design, but they're given a huge boost to domain-driven design, because event storming is like the best gateway drug to domain-driven design. And team topologies is the same, but from a different direction. And yeah, I never spoke to anyone who was interested in team topologies and wasn't getting into domain-driven design afterwards. So yeah, I think team topologies is great for it. It's a great methodology for managing the teams and assigning their responsibilities. But from the domain-driven design perspective, well, that's amazing. And Susanna Kaiser, she's writing a book about how team topologies and domain-driven design work together, how to connect these two methodologies.
Specifically to make adaptive systems. Right?
Yeah. And also, Nick Tune wrote a book that's going to be published soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, looking forward to that.
We are all looking forward to this new book from Nick.
It's amazing. Go ahead, people. go ahead to
Pre-order.
Amazon, pre-order it,
Yeah.
or go to Manning website, read the early release, because it's worth it, believe me.
All right. We're going to close up here in just a second. I wanted to show you on LinkedIn, we do have a company page for DDD United States. You can follow there. That'll essentially be where we talk about virtual meetup for the United States. And if you're interested in other training, there is at the bottom of our page several different things that are coming soon. DDD infusions, and Paul Rayner is conducting a workshop on event stormings in October, so you can register for that. We do have something in December that we're working on between Nick, Vlad, and myself to take people through the whole process of domain design. And we have some tricks up our sleeve that we're working on. So subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll keep you posted on the updates to that. And with that, I think that pretty much, Nick, did we have any questions in the chat that came up? I just wanted to see.
I don't think we have any questions, but we didn't ask anyone if they had questions, so we could put the word out there before we close up. Anyone want to chuck a question in the chat on YouTube?
We do have time. If you have any questions for the panel here, please feel free in the chat to ask. We'll address those now.
Maybe,
while we're waiting,
does anyone here have a question in this group that we haven't
I have a
covered?
little comment, actually, that an encouragement into what John was just sharing. So I travel maybe 4 or 5 months this year, mostly speaking workshops and work stuff, and it's all except for Explore DDD coming up in early 2024. It's all in Europe. And so one of the things I really want to encourage is that in the US, wherever technologists are gathering, to consider beginning to bring more of these themes into what's being presented to the US audience, not even inside the domain-driven design community necessarily, but outside of it, so that we can have these, the qualities of design we mean when we talk about this can become more generic here.
Branch out into the other arenas.
And I cannot fly overnight as often. Like I would really like to do that.
All right. What's next on the agenda for you, Nick? What do you have planned?
On what time scale?
In the next year.
In the next year? Oh, wow.
I'm trying to buy time until someone asks a question.
So we don't have any questions just yet, but for my year, we'll see what happens. I've had some great years recently. Got to meet a lot of people. So hopefully just more of the same for me. Getting to do this kind of work, it's a real pleasure. Getting to help different companies model their domains. I miss being deeply involved in decision making, but it's actually a great feeling to help other people model their domains and design their systems. So yeah, if I could get more of that, I'll be happy. How about you, John?
For me, it's kind of the same. I've been doing DDD for a few years now, and have had the opportunity to model domains at a very large insurance company, and it's pretty amazing to watch that unfold. So I'm just looking for that next opportunity.
Cool. So we have a question from Will. He's asking if we realize the spectrum of practice represented, complex engineered systems, strategic DDD, tactical DDD, refactoring, and evolutionary design. I'll let someone else take that. It's a good question, but I've been talking a lot. I'm not anything else.
I take that, excuse me. I take that to mean, do we understand the gravity of how big this is? To be able to comprehend how to strategize an entire organization, tactically model each area, and build systems that integrate well with each other. Yeah, I think most of us do. Does anybody have a word on that?
Just yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes, and yes, yes. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you guys for spending the time. This was a great opportunity to launch the site, talk a little bit about what DDD really is and how we can do it without knowing that we're doing it, and take it a little bit further by exploring the event storming opportunities as well as team topologies and other kind of sister paradigms that enable our designs. One thing I will say is I was speaking with Kent Beck, I think it was 3 European trips ago, and I asked him, so what happened when Agile showed up on the scene and design started to taper off? And he said, I don't understand how we got into this hamster wheel of making features, which was a description of this feature factory that Nick's talking about. So I just wanted to close by saying we're going to be moving in that direction where we want people to feel the freedom to design a system before they build it so it can evolve and last a lot longer than the rewrite process that we are usually getting out of systems that are emergently designed by programming. The most expensive way to design a system sometimes. So thank you guys for all of your time today and for answering my questions about DDD and your thoughts of how it relates to the US. And we'll just see where it goes from here. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers, John.
Cheers.